To describe Renee Pagel as a giver is like saying ice cream is pretty good. While most of us would agree that statement is true, it's an understatement. Renee's philanthropy was in a class by itself. She devoted her early adult years to a successful career in nursing. Later, she switched to teaching to spend more time with her children. In the summer of 2006, Renee learned the father of a student needed a new kidney. She didn't hesitate. On July 31st, she underwent a life-saving surgery, donating one of her kidneys to the needy dad. Then, 5 days into her recovery, Renee Pagel was brutally murdered, leaving her own 3 children motherless. Renee Beth DeMogg was born July 29, 1965 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was a bright light with a charitable spirit, and those who knew her described her quick wit and sunny disposition. Prior to her marriage to Michael Pagel, with whom she would have 3 children, Renee traveled abroad and worked as a medical missionary. She was employed as a nurse practitioner at Forest View Hospital. She enjoyed a successful career. Then, several years into her marriage, Renee switched gears and accepted a teaching position with the Kent Intermediate School District. She enjoyed sharing her passion for medicine and service with her students, and her new position afforded her a more predictable schedule and time with the Pagel's kids, twins Sarah and Joel, and younger daughter Hannah. At that time, husband Mike pushed to be a stay-at-home dad, so Renee was the family breadwinner. From the outside, the Pagels were thriving and their lifestyle was enviable. But despite the cozy-looking Mr. Mom scenario, things were strained in the Rockford, Michigan home. By 2005, the situation had become unbearable. Renee pressed Mike to contribute more to the finances. She had been working multiple jobs, while Mike held one low-paying part-time position. He made it clear he was not interested in her suggestion. So, instead of filling out job applications, Mike filed divorce papers, leaving Renee stunned and depressed. He wanted the house, full custody of all 3 children, plus alimony in the amount of $2,000 a month. Renee pushed back. The contentious battle dragged on for months. Finally, in the summer of 2006, a judge ordered Michael Pagel to secure a job with a salary sufficient to pay child support to Renee, to whom primary custody was awarded. By all reports, Mike was furious and blindsided by the judgment. 7 weeks later, Renee learned of a fresh opportunity to give. The father of one of her middle school students was suffering from kidney failure and desperately needed a new kidney. Renee was tested to see if she would be a suitable match. She was. At the end of July, the devoted mom prepared to donate her kidney in a life-saving operation. She expressed fear to her best friend, Chris Crandall. She wasn't expressing concern about the surgery. Rather, she had a deep-seated fear that her estranged husband, Mike, might try to harm her in the hospital. She was most concerned that he would tamper with her IV while she was recovering and warned her friend that, quote, if anything happens, it was him. Cut to Cortland Township, Michigan, August 2006. On August 5th, Forrest DeMogg and his wife Shar arrived at the home of his daughter, Renee Pagel. They intended to look in on her following her kidney transplant surgery. The home was tidy and quiet, so they could never have imagined the horrors that awaited them inside the master bedroom. They found Renee, age 41, dead in her bed. She was twisted up in the bedding, and she had been stabbed numerous times. Blood spatter coated the walls and even the ceiling. In such a weakened state, Renee could not have done anything to defend herself against her attacker. But in addition to the more than 50 stab wounds to her face and torso, both her hands and feet showed signs that she did try to fight back. There were slashes to her hands, indicating that at some point she likely grabbed the blade. Slash wounds to her feet indicated she tried to kick her killer. What wasn't clear was a motive. Despite obvious signs of a stabbing, no murder weapon was found at the scene. Renee's jewelry armoire was filled, and electronics and cash were in plain view. There were no signs of a break-in. Kent County Deputy Michael Allen described the crime scene as eerie, adding that he felt an unmistakable presence of evil when he entered the master bedroom. Investigators deemed the homicide a crime of passion, based on the number of stab wounds concentrated about Renee's face. This murder was personal. Lieutenant E.J. Johnson was one of the early detectives on the scene, which he describes as the most brutal he's experienced, before or since. Investigators wasted no time interviewing witnesses and checking alibis, starting with Renee's father. He explained that he'd seen his daughter the previous evening when he picked up his grandchildren from her home to drop them off with Renee's estranged husband. Since their separation, Mike Pagel resided in the former family home about 15 minutes away. Forrest DeMogg had spoken to his daughter by phone later that evening, which helped to fix the timeline of events. When asked about possible suspects, DeMogg recounted his daughter's contentious divorce and expressed his belief that Mike was the only person with a motive to kill her. Authorities tried to interview Michael Pagel, but he appeared disinterested and offered only his attorney's business card. Upon advice of said counsel, he chose to remain silent about his estranged wife's murder. Detectives learned Mike was hosting a sleepover with his children and his mother, Patricia. When detectives showed up at the Pagel residence 4 hours after the discovery of Renee's body, they found Patricia alone. She said Mike was attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but she did agree to speak with them. She recalled a normal evening at home, but she remembered hearing the exterior door open and close around 2 or 3 a.m. She assumed it was Mike letting the dog out. 6 months later, Kent County Assistant Prosecutor Kellee Koncki questioned Patricia herself. It was February 2007, and Mike's mother was called to a deposition to elicit information under oath. At that time, Patricia Pagel recanted her earlier statements to police. She claimed she had been confused about the reason for their visit the previous August and denied saying that Mike had let the dog out. This time, she said she had let the dog out at 3:30 a.m. She further testified that when she visited her son's home, she stayed in the bedroom and he slept on the couch. She now said he was asleep on the sofa at 3:30. He said he never left. There was no evidence to the contrary, so while the investigation continued and detectives diligently pursued justice for Renee, the homicide eventually became a cold case. Friends and family, however, were convinced that Mike was the perpetrator. Who else could possibly have wanted to harm such a kind and generous, low-risk victim? Detective Allen expressed the frustration of the department, stating, quote, "It was sad that we couldn't bring closure to Renee and her family. They questioned a tenant who lived on Renee's property, but he was ruled out as a suspect. And for years, Mike Pagel's attorney boasted of his client's rock-solid alibi. But Renee's loyal friends would not allow her to be forgotten. Best friend Chris Crandall, recalling Renee's fear of Michael Pagel, kept Renee's memory alive. She created a website dedicated to the loving mother, nurse, and teacher, soliciting tips and information from the community. For 12 long years, the leads didn't come, and the case remained cold. Then, in 2018, Detective Sergeant Bill Marks took over the investigation. With Lieutenant Johnson and Prosecutor Koncki, he presented the Pagel case to the Michigan Cold Case Homicides Committee. The committee was comprised of district attorneys and investigators from around the state who annually reviewed cold cases. The panel encouraged the team to pursue an arrest of Mike Pagel. They believed there was overwhelming evidence against him and cited his flimsy alibi. Feeling encouraged, investigators looked at the file with a fresh eye and re-interviewed witnesses. Then, on November 18, 2019, Chris received a tip from an unlikely source. Charles Bo Pagel, brother of Michael Pagel, reached out to her with a friend request through her website. Chris worked with police to set up a recorded call. She didn't know a whole lot about Bo Pagel, but she knew he didn't like Renee, so much so that he had boycotted their wedding, causing a rift between him and his brother that lasted over a decade. Detectives had no idea what to expect, but hoped the phone call would be the break they needed to finally get a line on a suspect. Bo didn't disappoint. He told Chris he was, quote, losing it and was terrified that he would be his brother's next victim, just like Renee. It took some time and multiple interviews, but in 2020, Bo Pagel explained that 5 years after Renee's murder, he and his brother were sitting in a car when Mike pulled a large knife from a bag. He confessed, "This is how I finalized my divorce." Bo wasn't impressed. He was shocked and angry. He had always defended his brother, believing him to be innocent. He said Michael became furious at his disgust and indignation and tossed the knife into the creek. To paraphrase, he warned him to keep his mouth shut or he would end up like Renee. Detectives were thrilled. This was what they'd been waiting for. But the real bombshell was yet to drop. Beau recounted Mike saying he had stashed some boots and coveralls in what he called a honey hole in some brush and made a few trial runs before actually murdering Renee. He was pretty sure he could pull off his plan without getting caught. Mike complained that she had it coming to her. All he wanted was for her to pay him, but she refused, so he let himself into her house and confronted her. She didn't back down, so he stabbed her until she was dead. When asked why he didn't come forward sooner, Beau said he still felt a sense of loyalty to his brother, but the deciding factor was their mom. Patricia Pagel knew Mike had killed Renee. Beau was the one who had told her. Following Mike's confession to him in 2011, Beau relayed the entire conversation about Renee's murder to his mother. She didn't seem surprised, he explained, and she begged him to, quote, "just don't do anything until after I'm gone." Patricia Pagel was gone by that point. She died in 2019. As for the knife, Beau was able to direct detectives to the area where the murder weapon was discarded, but the creek was murky and treacherous, so rather than send in a dive team, Marks designed a device to dredge the creek bed with the aid of an industrial magnet. On the third day, they recovered the murder weapon and secured a search warrant for Michael Pagel's residence. They found hard drives and journals filled with Pagel's hatred for Renee. They also described the writings as odd, as if written by more than one person or personality. They arrested Michael Pagel on February 6, 2020. When presented with the evidence against him, Renee's husband and father of her children confessed to second-degree murder for his involvement in the homicide, but he did not take the blame for the actual killing. He claimed he hired his brother Beau to stab Renee Pagel to death. He later stated, quote, "I was not in my right mind when I hired my brother to murder Renee. We plotted the murder and he carried it out. No one else was involved." But investigators found no evidence of Beau's involvement, and the judge didn't believe Michael's allegations. In October 2020, Kent County Circuit Court Judge George J. Quist sentenced Michael Pagel to 25 to 50 years for the murder of his wife. If released, he will be in his 80s. At the sentencing, Prosecutor Kellee Koncki described Renee's death as gruesome, painful, and horrifying. Friends and family of Renee Pagel are still mourning her loss. Her children, now young adults, lived with the rumors that their father had murdered their mother but had long supported him as innocent. So learning that he was in fact guilty was hard to accept. In a 2021 interview with Dateline's Andrea Canning, daughter Sarah, then 22, recounted internet searches when she was a teenager, all of which seemed to point to her father as a murderer. It was a harsh reality. This was not the father she and her siblings knew. Sarah added she never doubted her mother's love. She and twin Joel were 7 years old when Renee was killed. Younger sister Hannah was just 3. She sent a letter to the judge conceding that her father had caused indescribable pain to her family, but she wanted him to know he did an amazing job raising them. At his sentencing, Pagel stated, "I am ultimately responsible for her death, and I regret this very much." His children will have to take his word for it. It is some comfort that he confessed and will likely spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, but he didn't take full responsibility for the crime, instead choosing to blame his brother for the actual homicide. For his part, Beau stated that it was his love for Mike's children that pushed him to tell the truth, adding that he just couldn't live with it anymore. So sadly, this may be the best measure of justice Renee Pagel will ever get.